It is just at this beautiful moment that the sun is coming up, and I'm gonna take you with me for a walk, and then I will read one of my texts to you. So, isn't it great? Yes. I was riding my bicycle to this place, and I was hoping to get there right at that moment that the sun is coming up over the hills. And yes, I made it without a clock. I guess I go by some sort of an internal clock. Yeah, but here I am uh, going on my morning bike ride here and talking with you. I have written something which I want to share with you because my embodied language keeps evolving, and I find that so fascinating how that works. And so I'm not static. I'm not bound by one particular way. Although, of course, I only know what I know, and at any given moment, I have to be true to what I know in order to continue to build on my knowledge of embodied language. And so this is a controversial issue, to say the least, because you know, in other knowledge that people have had, or that people still have, there have, of course, always been explanations which for a long time have dominated the world, because people were believing that the earth was flat, for instance, and that you would fall off or something like that. Or we have had all kinds of superstitious explanations of what is going on, and yeah, there is just no way around it. We have, due to our way of talking, adhered to a way of explaining human behavior which is just utterly false, and consequently we are experiencing enormous problems which can only be explained if we begin to use our language correctly. And the correct use of language is, of course, pertaining to the overt use of language, where we no longer are distracted by the illusion of inner language, because language doesn't exist within us. Yeah? And so that is kind of what I am going to talk with you about in my writing. And but I'm giving you an introduction here. Here, look how beautiful this is. I love this place. It is a gully that fills up with water in the winter time, and then as it dries up, there's thousands of frogs jumping around there because it is a nice habitat for these small amphibians, which make me so happy. I love frogs. You could say a frog has always been an animal that reminds me of my boyhood years, and frogs are just beautiful animals that like to jump around. And yeah, so I want to continue to talk about the importance of understanding the language correctly, and I will, just for now slow down so that when I find a place to sit and so that I can read my writing, then I will start reading to you what I've written. Yeah. So for now, I'm just gonna sort of calm myself down because I'm starting to get all excited about frogs here. I am like that. I get excited and kind of carried away, but I can also regulate myself again with my language. And then, yeah, then I talk like this. This is such a beautiful spot. You can see where the trees are, where the bushes are. That is, of course, where the moist is, and where plants can still grow, even though it gets extremely hot here in the summer. And so this is a nice place to go down in the gully here. Gotta be careful because it is a bit, with these loose rocks, you can easily begin to slide. And I have to be careful that I don't fall with my bicycle in my hand. Here I am. This is a perfect place. Oh yes, fantastic. I put my bicycle here. Oh, I take it with me. Here. This is such a nice spot to be here today. Here. And I feel so fortunate that I am so close to all of this beauty, where I can just take a short bicycle ride and then be here. And you can see here the, in the winter time the water just flows here, yeah. But now it is completely dried up. Only in some moist spots there's still some frogs here and there. Maybe we can spot some of them. Oh, sorry. Oh. Oh. I almost felt like as if I had pressed the button that I stopped recording, but luckily it still continues. All right. Let me put this bicycle like this. Here we go. Like that. Okay. Okay. So I'm going to walk. Maybe. Look how nice these. Let's sit here. At any given time, this whole section can collapse because of erosion, as you can see. And I don't want to sit on these roots and have this whole section collapse on me. that would be a tragic end, would it? And then maybe later they find my video and they see how it got collapsed by this thing. No. I am pretty cautious when it comes to things like that. But here, this is a good spot to sit. Here it is. There you go. Okay. Yeah. Okay. And bear with me if my handwriting is not always as clear as it should be, but I wrote it this morning as I was sitting in the jacuzzi of the sports club where I go almost every morning to work out. So here it is. The overt nature of language tells us why we have certain beliefs. But our tenacious belief in the illusion of inner language distracts us from our use of language, which of course goes hand in hand with our behavior. Yeah. So, oops, there's a mosquito here, and the mosquito wants to get me. Uh-oh. So this is a big conundrum that we haven't been able to crack, because we are all used to disembodied language. And disembodied language is our usual group behavior in which we do not listen to ourselves while we speak. Disembodied language makes us listen to others and makes us try to get other people listen to us. But we're not listening to ourselves. So in disembodied language, we do not describe our behavior correctly because we're not listening to ourselves. And consequently, we believe in the illusion of inner language. We believe that we have a mind, we believe that we have an internal conversation with ourselves in our head. But there is no such thing going on. We only fantasize that. And the reason that we continue to fantasize that is because we have never said it. We have never said it in the way it is. We have never called our belief in inner language a belief, which is not true. Inner language does not exist. There is no language inside of us. So it's just the way we talk, which has affected us over time, which makes us refer to inner stuff as if there is language inside of us. And that belief in inner language distracts from the overt nature of language. It goes like that. It seems as if our inner language is more important than our actual experience. Our actual experience, which can never be correctly addressed with our disembodied language, in which we do not listen to ourselves while we speak. We can only address our individually lived experience with our embodied language. And in embodied language, we listen to ourselves while we speak. Yeah, that's what I do right now. So I read again the first sentence, which sort of sets the stage for the rest of this writing. The overt nature of language tells us why we have certain beliefs, but our tenacious belief in inner language, in the illusion of inner language, distracts us from our use of language, which of course goes hand in hand with our behavior. Yeah? So we behave, and then we have a particular way of using language. Stated differently, our language, it co-occurs with our behavior, but it does not cause our behavior. Yeah? Our behavior, you could say, our behavior as an individual is for a big part determined by our environment. And our environment, yeah, if you are in a hot environment, you feel hot. And if you're in a cold environment, you feel cold. And if you're in a Dutch verbal environment, you learn the Dutch language. And if you're in a French verbal environment, you're most likely going to learn the French language. Yeah. And so we are affected as individuals by our environment, and our behavior is the way in which we either adjust to our environment and survive, yeah, or not. Yeah. And so you could say language is also a way of adjusting to our environment. Not many people see it that way, but of course you can say it is an explanation of what the environment is, or a description of the environment, but it can also be described as a form of self-regulation so that we can be adjusted, in tune with, or cognizant of, yeah, cognizant is such a rotten word, sorry, that we can be understanding of what is our environment. Just what I was just describing, you know, this situation there, yeah, that is a potentially dangerous situation, yeah, where that bank, it may actually eventually collapse, maybe not today or so, but you know, it is predictable that at some point this whole thing collapses. And that is not fancy. No, it has already eroded, and it is going to erode further, and then eventually the roots will be washed away so much that the tree falls over. Yeah, that it collapses. So, so it is important to recognize that our um, our language co-occurs with behavior. So in the same way that our other behavior is an interaction with our environment, so too our language is an interaction with our environment. And then, of course, there is the way in which our environment determines, maintains, elicits, or continues our disembodied language, in which we do not listen to ourselves while we speak, in which we make other people listen to us, but in which we do not listen to ourselves. And there's, of course, another environment in which we are able, like here, I am here by myself in this beautiful creek bed. And that's a perfect environment for me to have embodied language, of course, because there's no threat, there's no pressure, it is very quiet and peaceful. And I'm having embodied language. I listen to myself while I speak. I'm not trying to make anybody listen to me, even though I make this video. Yeah, I like to make this video because I have in my writing this morning expressed a development of my embodied language, which I am excited about. So I'm excited about this new development. And since I've written about it, I want to also speak about it, and that's what I'm doing right now. And you are lucky enough to hear that. So our disembodied language, of course, it's our disembodied language and our behavior. Yeah, there is, of course, our disembodied language, and then there is other behavior that goes together with our disembodied language. Yeah, everything that has to do with us being stressful and frustrated and angry and defensive and argumentative, and I don't know, we're feeling hurt, we're feeling misunderstood, disrespected, all these kind of negative things, they all go together with our disembodied language. And so all the things we do to deal with that, yeah, all the behavioral things we do, we weaponize ourselves. Yeah, Americans have a lot of weapons, and but that's just one aspect of our disembodied language. Yeah, to protect ourselves. Yeah, we want to protect ourselves, and we isolate, of course, also. And we do all sorts of things. All kinds of behaviors go together with our disembodied language. So yes, surely our disembodied language and the behavior which co-occurs with it, it always refers to, how could it be otherwise, a threatening contingency in which we reactively fight, flee, or freeze. I'm going to stand up because the mosquito is bothering me. So, do you see what I was doing? I adjusted to my environment. The mosquito was bothering me and I walked away and I escaped. Yeah, I avoided the mosquito. That is a behavioral adjustment to my environment right there. So again, I read to you just to make clear that this is all coherent and following from one sentence to the next. So our disembodied language and the behavior which co-occurs with it always refers to a threatening contingency in which we reactively fight, flee, or freeze. While embodied language, yeah, that is the language that I'm having here, it only happens in a non-aversive contingency, yeah? So in an environment that is free of aversive stimuli, yeah? And of course that mosquito is a bit of an aversive stimulus. So I say, I keep walking. I keep moving. Yeah. Embodied language, Yeah, my embodied language expresses my individually lived experience effectively. And that correct expression of my individually lived experience, it simply leaves no room for or any urge. Yeah, I don't have any urge for inner language. There is no room for inner language. Yeah, I don't have an illusion of inner language. I just don't believe it. Because here I am. My language is overt. And when I am not talking, there is no language. I am without language when I stop speaking, when I stop hearing anything, when I stop writing or reading what I've written. So that's what real language is. Language is always overt. So once you stop language, there is no language. And that is my default. Embodied language expresses my individually lived experience effectively, leaving no room or urge for the illusion of inner language, because I have used my language correctly. And this simple explanation is of course only possible with my embodied language. And I should say the continuation of my embodied language, because a moment of embodied language is simply not going to cut it. But the moment I start talking with a person, and this is the new aspect that I was referring to, which I've discovered today, the moment I start talking with a person who doesn't know about the difference between disembodied language and embodied language, this newness, if you will, this simple explanation that there is no inner language and that all language is overt, it is immediately, even if I verbally articulate it very clearly, it is immediately thrown out. It is immediately rejected. It is immediately obfuscated, forgotten, defended against. It is immediately denied. It is immediately rejected because people immediately feel attacked. They immediately feel that they have to sort of just argue against it. And of course they do that with disembodied language. So whenever I speak with anyone about this matter, they immediately start to change the language into disembodied language. They are not able to have embodied language with me because they simply do not know how it works. And if they get it, however, what I'm saying, this is an interesting thing. Some people, they get it. Some people, and they get it immediately. And they immediately attempt to reason along with what I'm saying. It is so fascinating that they instantaneously get it. You know, yesterday I was talking with a lady who had actually a very terrible car accident some years ago, and who had some very traumatic brain damage, and who went through a lot of physical therapy as well as psychological therapy. And I briefly explained to her the overt nature of language, and she immediately got it. She immediately tuned into it, and she says, "So I'm without inner language." And I said, "Yes, you are." And she says, "So all the problems are solved when I adhere to embodied language." I said, yes, that's right. She says, "So I wish I heard that. I wish somebody had told me this earlier." I said, "Well, I'm telling you now." We had a good laugh together. So it is either that immediate recognition, or there is the immediate reactivity with disembodied language, And so, And then, of course, the language is immediately changed, because if language is not an overt phenomenon, then the covert language must be true and must be defended and must be, I don't know, whatever, must survive, or must be victorious over that statement that I'm making, that bold statement which goes against all science. Yeah, that is also such an enormous, it is an enormous thing to recognize that this goes against all science. This goes against everything we supposedly know. Yeah, but I'm saying it. Language is, was, and will always be an overt phenomenon. Yeah, there is no inner language. There never will be. Even though we have said so for lifetimes, people have believed it for lifetimes, it doesn't make it true. So, whenever I speak with anyone about this matter, that language is always overt, that there is no inner language, they immediately start to change the language into disembodied language again, or they get it and they are beginning to become capable of reasoning along with me about the overt nature of language. And such a conversation, such a conversation with such people who in this case are reasoning along with me, such a and of course also the conversation of the people that are arguing with me with disembodied language, such a conversation inevitably is again disembodied language. And of course that is because the person with disembodied language, for the most part, they do not know about the difference between disembodied language and embodied language. And I can explain it to them, but that doesn't immediately mean that they will fully understand it. That cannot be the case, because you must explore it on your own. And so even the person who initially reasons along with me, at some point they begin to fight and defend and to sort of revert back again to, even though they want to hear this and they recognize intuitively, what we call intuitively, but it simply means that they're open to this line of reasoning that I'm having, because now I'm talking about being rational. Now I'm talking about correctly describing that 2 and 2 is 4, not 5, okay? And 2 and 2 is still 4, even though millions of people are saying it's 5. Yeah, and that is kind of the situation we're in with our language. So, whenever I have a somewhat rational conversation with anyone in which I explain or express, maybe I'm not explaining it, I'm simply stating it, that language is overt, maybe people immediately get it and begin to sort of reason along with it for a while. Or they immediately react and they immediately throw in a monkey wrench. They immediately start arguing. They immediately start fighting back, defending, etc. And of course, they do so instead of calmly talking with me. Yeah, they do so because they are reacting. They're mechanically reacting involuntarily. Yeah, it's just their behavioral history which is involuntarily playing out in their lives. They do not even realize that this is just their conditioning history which is asserting itself and which prevents them from being voluntarily involved in language. And that's what I do. I am voluntarily involved in my language, with my embodied language. So whenever I talk with people, and it doesn't matter whether they temporarily agree with me or go along with me or reason along with me or seem to get it or not. It doesn't matter whether they immediately argue with me or not. The thing is, of course, if they have disembodied language, and they do, then I have disembodied language as well. And I fully acknowledge that, I fully acknowledge that whenever a person has disembodied language with me, then I am also having disembodied language with them. I have reverted to disembodied language again when I talk with a person who has disembodied language. Right now, I'm having embodied language, yeah? And so there's no person who has disembodied language with whom I'm talking right now. So I'm not reverting back to disembodied language. But if I were talking with you, I would certainly have a disembodied language again. And so it just happens that way. It happens that way because I interact with the disembodied language from which I want to flee. Yeah, I don't like your disembodied language. I don't like anyone's disembodied language. So I only have so many options. I either flee, I freeze, yeah, I keep myself shut, I don't say anything, yeah, I try to sort of lay low, yeah, not rock the boat. Or I flee, I go away, I avoid, or I fight back. And here is an interesting thing. Until now, it seems, and I have not before realized this. This is the new discovery. Until now, I didn't know what I'm formulating today. Because it is still possible, in spite of disembodied language, that 2 and 2 is 4, of course, yeah? And so 2 and 2 is 4 in spite of us engaging in disembodied language. And in the same way, I can rationally speak about embodied language while engaging in disembodied language. Yeah. So the language, like 2 and 2 is 4, can still continue to be true, yeah, true to embodied language, although embodied language is not experienced. So, yeah, so you can have an understanding of embodied language without experiencing it. And this is, simply a rational explanation about embodied language. And so I have, just due to my history and due to my own need, always put the experience first. Always. You experience it first, you hear yourself while you speak, and you neurologically experience happy, relaxed, at ease, and then you put words to that. And not only words, you have a sound that goes with that. The sound of your well-being expresses your neurological, they call that parasympathetic activation, where you are safe, where you are at ease, you're not threatened. And so that is a description which is true in spite of the fact that you might get stressed again, frustrated, and you might get upset again and angry and engage in disembodied language. So there is, in that sense, a way of describing our reality verbally, correctly or incorrectly. And that description pertains, of course, to both our disembodied language as well as our embodied language. And we can still talk about embodied language with disembodied language, because 2 and 2 is still 4, even though many people believe it's 5. And the nature of language is still true, the overt nature of language is still true, even though millions of people around the world believe that we have inner language. Yeah? It is still true in spite of the fact that all of science, all of Western psychology I feel bugged again by a mosquito. Oh, yeah, even though all of psychology will tell us that no, we have internal language, we have subjective conversations in yeah, whatever, you know, we have internal, yeah, language, yeah. That's the subvocal. They call that subvocal conversations with ourselves. Yeah, it's not true. It's just not true. It is how we talk about what happens inside of us, but there is no language inside of us. There never was. And any neuroscientist ought to be able to say to us, yeah, unequivocally, that inner language simply does not exist. There's just neurons that do what neurons do. There's neurotransmission, but there's no language anywhere inside of us. There never was, there never will be. So I read again, just to pick it up. So instead of talking calmly, I also have, when I talk with somebody with disembodied language, I also have reverted to disembodied language again, because I interact with disembodied language from which I also want to flee or to fight or to escape, yeah? However, the language, just like 2 and 2 equals 4, can still continue to be true to embodied language, although embodied language as such is not experienced. So we are reasoning about embodied language now, yeah? And so the understanding in this case, you could say, comes first. I didn't know before today what I formulate here. While I have always attempted to give space to people to discover their own embodied language, I have until now chosen for my own well-being by withdrawing from disembodied language as much as possible. The binary nature of disembodied language and embodied language made me do this. Yeah, I noticed that disembodied language and embodied language, they never meet, they never co-occur, they do not overlap. So that made me realize that no, I cannot I cannot have embodied language with somebody who has disembodied language, and my embodied language disappears when somebody has disembodied language with me. So yeah, if I want to have disembodied language, which I wanted to, and which I felt like I needed to, I just have to avoid these people. I have to escape them. I have to get out of the way. And by now, I've done that so often, I guess, I've done that so much that my neural behavior has changed because of that. Yeah. And my embodied language has stabilized, which before it wasn't. So so the binary nature of disembodied language made me escape, made me avoid. I'm very good at escaping and avoiding. However, there's also, of course, this possibility of fighting back, right? Fight, flight, freeze. And fighting back was never something in my life that I was good at. I was always, as a kid, bullied and running away, and I was very good at running away. That's how I survived. And so I've always escaped, I've always avoided. But at this point, I realized that with my reason, I can fight back. It's very odd how I suddenly notice that I didn't notice before. After all this studying that I've done, yeah, I have a Master's of Arts and a Master's of Science, and I almost achieved a doctorate degree in psychology, but I withdrew because I wanted to continue with my embodied language. I wanted to stay true to this. Yeah, this is an aspect of that. Yeah. And so I wanted to be able to continue with my own embodied language. And yes, I withdrew from this study. I withdrew from the whole field of psychology. I taught for 10 years. I worked for many years in mental health. I withdrew from this whole rigmarole because it's all based on the illusion of inner language. I don't want to be part of that. I am my own person. I am my own authority. And that's why I speak like this. That's why I can have embodied language. Yeah. And so I'm a master of my own language. I use my language voluntarily. And so, but the binary nature made me flee or avoid, right? And I did that very effectively, apparently, because I feel so happy that things have changed. But at this point in time, however, I realize there are people who can be reached. This is another thing that I realize now. There are people who can be reached through the verbal exchange, which is not a debate, but a mapping, a mapping of embodied language. So I'm not into having a debate with people, okay? I mean, to me, debates are useless. But I'm interested in the rational mapping of embodied language. Just like we can say there are chemical formulas which work, there are mathematical formulas which work. Well, language works if we adhere to its overt nature. Yeah. And that's just a very logically coherent stance. Not a debate. Yeah, people can disagree with me. That's fine. I do not need to convince them. And if they want to know about this, then they have to talk with themselves to verify for themselves that, of course, there is a huge difference between the way in which they use language when they do not listen to themselves and when they imagine that there's inner language, and the way they use language when they adhere to the overt nature of language. So just like there is looking at a map, you can look at a map. I don't believe many people will do that anymore these days, because we have now, what is it called? Global positioning, GPS. Yeah. But you're still looking at a map to know where you are. Yeah. There is verbal behavior to orient ourselves in spite of the ubiquity of disembodied language. So the whole world, regardless of where we are, regardless of which culture we belong to, everybody everywhere has, whether they know it or not, admit it or not, or are able to talk about it or not, we're all adhering to disembodied language, and we are adhering to the illusion of inner language. And so once we begin to listen to ourselves while we speak, and once we begin to talk rationally about embodied language, it is like looking at a map. It is like orienting ourselves again to who we are, to where we are, what we are, in spite of being surrounded by everyone with disembodied language. And there's an example that I give here. My wife gets on my case about this sometimes, that I went to see somebody and that I was assuming that I knew where they live because I had been there before. And then when we go there, I seem to have forgotten exactly where it was. And I should have written down the address. And then we are driving around trying to find that place, and I have to call them again to tell me where it is. I know it's stupid, but it's a good example of how me calling them and they telling me, how the verbal behavior, in a sense, again, tells me where I am and how I should go where I need to be. In any case, that's just an example, okay? Also, I like to compare, just for the sake of, giving an example, I I like to compare language also to a microscope, yeah, a microscope which makes something which is very small visible to the eye. We cannot see it with the naked eye, but we can see it with a microscope. So a microscope is an instrument to make things visible, yeah. And likewise, a telescope, yeah, with which we look at the stars, a telescope can bring things that are very far away close, yeah. And so that is another incredible invention, a tool, yeah, if you will, to help us observe reality, yeah, the planets, and yeah, different universes or whatever. Yeah, I once heard that for a long time the assumption with the Big Bang was that there is a bang, an explosion of sorts, and then the debris of the Big Bang, it's sort of just it's just like a firecracker exploding, and then the paper is sort of just sort of falls to the ground or something like that. It just sort of settles in a sense, and that is how universe was created. That was kind of like the Big Bang theory. I mean, maybe I totally misunderstand it, but that's how I, with my limited knowledge of astronomy, know about it. But then there was this spaceship Hubble or so, or the space telescope or whatever, and then then we were able to to look deep into the universe or something, and then to our own big surprise, it became clear that these stars that we are looking at, and they have infrared or something like that. It's another magnificent way of looking at things. Of course, X-rays and stuff like that. It is all having to do with that also. And sound is also a vibration, if you want to bring that one in. But in any case, it was discovered that the universe is actually expanding at an accelerated rate. And so everything is just moving further and further apart. When I read about that, or at least I believe I kind of understood what it meant, I suddenly had a sort of an epiphany, like, wow, this is just such a major breakthrough that they discovered something like that. Well, okay, so so I've mentioned now the telescope, the microscope, and also X-rays and stuff like that, and now I'm talking about language. I'm talking about language. Language being, what is it? Language in written form, because this is also why we emphasize writing over speaking, because all of science is of course based on written language and on ignoring spoken language. We don't say that out loud, but I'm saying it. And so in spite of us having written scientific language, there's no spoken scientific language. So you could say embodied language is spoken scientific language. And the self-knowledge that I derive from my embodied language is as valid as the knowledge which is scientific, which also allows us to predict and to get the outcomes that we have predicted. So that is all going together. So self-knowledge and scientific knowledge go hand in hand in embodied language. And so just looking at the map that I was talking about before, there is written embodied language, and I'm reading it here to you, written embodied language, which can describe the embodied language in spoken form. And such description is always, of course, it is always the embodied language about my individually lived experience. So if there is a person who has embodied language in written form, which describes the embodied language in spoken form, and that person talks with somebody who has disembodied language, and they still refer to disembodied language, that description, yeah, even though you go into disembodied language, the description is still embodied language about my individually lived experience, which can only be understood if the person himself or herself starts to have embodied language about his own or her own individually lived experience. So I'm not into trying to convince someone with my disembodied language, no. But it must be someone with disembodied language who wants to understand, who wants to have an understanding first before they have an experience. So that's another thing that I just discovered. That person with disembodied language that I'm describing here, who might actually understand this rationally, is a person who wants to understand what I'm talking about. And so they want to understand it first. They don't want to experience it first. Like for instance, one time I talked with, it was very interesting. I had a brief conversation with Noam Chomsky, who, to my big surprise, many, many years ago, when I contacted him with an email, he wanted to talk with me. And Noam Chomsky had his secretary arrange a phone conference between him and me. And in this phone conference, Noam Chomsky, almost in an interrogating manner, questioned me about what I was saying, and I wasn't as clear about it as I am today. But he just basically asked me, how does that work, that embodied language? I mean, I'm just paraphrasing what he said, but he was interested in my philosophy of language. And I wasn't even at that point saying that all language is overt. I was simply saying that there is a difference between listening to ourselves while we speak and not listening to ourselves while we speak. That was my focus back then. And so I talked with him, and I tried to answer his questions as best as I could, but that was not to his satisfaction, because he just wanted to hear the theory, and I wanted him to... I told him literally, I said that he was not listening to himself, and therefore he could not understand it. and Noam Chomsky, he immediately hung up on me. But that also sort of just made me feel like, no, buddy, you just don't want to experience what I'm talking about, and I know what I'm talking about. I know that, yeah, in embodied language, of course, yeah, you experience what you experience, and your language fits with your experience, yeah. You're not forcing your language on your experience. No, you adjust your language to your experience. But no, Chomsky was not willing to do that, like so many other people. Anyway, he hung up on me, and that was that. But now at this point in time, I do understand that there is also a possibility. Noam Chomsky wouldn't understand me anyway, I mean, he would never wanted to understand me. I know that. And there are people that just want Noam Chomsky is a bully, yeah? Make no mistakes. He and so many other people with their so-called knowledge, they just want to bully people into accepting what they supposedly know. And I've always hated these people. I've never been able to learn anything from anybody whose sound I could not tolerate. Yeah, so this is how my learning process has occurred. But anyways, I've come to my conclusions about language because I have now understood that it is possible that there are individuals who, of course, based on their history of conditioning, want to have understanding of what embodied language is first, and then maybe want to experiment with it, and then maybe begin to get it. Which is a huge difference from what I've been saying until now. Yeah? And I fully acknowledge that. But I wasn't able to say this before. So there is this possibility to rationally understand embodied language, even though we are still having disembodied language. Yes, that is a major thing. And so you can understand by looking at a map, yeah, you can understand that this is where you are and that's where you want to be. It is as simple as that, yeah. And the only way to get there is to get it right with your language, to follow the right route, yeah. The overt nature of language. Okay, so let me just finish this reading here. Ooh, my hands get a bit stiff here from holding this paper. Okay, so as I was saying, it can never be about trying to convince someone with disembodied language, but it must be someone with disembodied language who wants to have an understanding first before they have the experience. And it is understandable that they want to verbally get it first. Yeah? It is understandable because that is also an issue in terms of how we deal with the trustworthiness of things. We have been all taken advantage of. We have all been bamboozled by someone else's disembodied language. In disembodied language, we have been forever distracted from who we are. And with embodied language, we're no longer distracted from who we are. We express our individually lived experience correctly with our ongoing embodied language, and that is our language enlightenment.